we're in adjacent spaces, if not altogether the same space, around the conversations that we have, right? You just wrote an amazing piece about being an abolitionist and about abolition. I want to open up the conversation because I think that people really get nervous when we start having conversations about abolition. People get really nervous when we start having conversations. Like the narrative around defunding the police and what that meant got so perverted and so like off the rails. But I want to ask you a two-part question just to open things up. Number one, for those people who have not had an opportunity to read your piece, what do you mean when you say abolition? When you talk about abolition, what do you mean? And then number two, quite frankly, this may be the most controversial part of the conversation for some, do we need police?
No. Okay, so boom. All right.
So boom.
Yeah, let me tell you. So I expect that abolition is going to sound radical to anybody. Like I expect that it's going to sound wild to anybody. It sounded wild to me the first time I heard it. If you are raised in a society where you're taught that policing in prisons is as natural as air and water, which we are taught that way. We're all taught, like as a little kid, learn 911, you call it like this, you play cops and robbers, the bad guys are the robbers, the good guys and cops. It's wielded into everything that you watch, even your animations, right? Kids today have Paw Patrol, we had this, you watch Darkwing Duck, you watch Powerpuff Girls, you watch everything. Everybody is an agent of the police in some way, and that's how it's treated. So I recognize it's gonna sound outlandish. It sounded that way to me too. The way I see my role in it is, I'm going to be as clear and honest as to what is necessary and what I believe. And I will give you the grace of taking the time it takes you to get there, because nobody just abandons their entire worldview the first time it's challenged. And
Absolutely.
That's just the truth. And, you know, Democrat, Republican, black, white, whoever, we're all educated in societies like this, just inundated with propaganda and this belief that even what they call it.
Hold on. They didn't catch that.
Propaganda.
They didn't catch that. Yeah, I did. Yeah, that will be borrowed, but go ahead.
Yeah. So,
y'all heard it here first. So when you see me use it, I'm not taking credit for it, but I am going to use it. So go right ahead.
You know, inundated with this propaganda, even when we call the legal system is the criminal justice system. And
listen, so have we had this conversation?
No, but I'm sure we right here.
So I'll just, this is part of the book that I'm writing. I'll just open this wide up. America does not have a criminal justice system. America has never had a criminal justice system. At best, it could be said that in the most ideal of spaces, America has what purports to be a criminal accountability system. Justice and the notion of justice is something that is restorative.
Yeah.
If you are the victim of a crime and something is taken from you or you are harmed in some sort of way, justice dictates that in a perfect world, you would be returned to whatever position you were in beforehand. Yeah. The truth is that reality is never going to happen.
Yeah.
The trauma that you will maintain, that you will carry with you from that experience cannot be erased. In many cases, the physical harm or the emotional damage that results from being in that experience, from having contact with that system, all of it can never be erased, even if you are on the side of being a victim.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so the idea of justice is one that is so out of reach. It drives me crazy when we have police violence and people are in the streets talking about justice. That is a notion that is so far beyond our reach that we can't get to. The best we can hope for is that someone is held accountable. And even that
but it's completely
is a challenge in and of itself.
That's the thing. It's not justice, but it's incredibly consistent with what the demands would be of anybody educated in a society that is taught that justice is punishment. That's what we're taught. Yeah. That's what the system does. And, I constantly harp on the fact that this deliberate misnomer, but it's not to, to be educated, to be like, oh, that system's not just, and you keep calling it that. No. I do that because if you think of something, if something is called that, you think it's a criminal justice system in your mind, its purpose is to bring about justice. Regardless of what it's actually doing, that's its intended purpose. So if it doesn't do that, you think of it as a mistake. The system is making an error. And that's what makes the conversations for reform and all these different things. So it has to be, that's why it's ingrained in us, and people, that's why their default is no matter how many times you tell them, they can literally spend their entire life hearing tragic stories, hearing about the Central Park Five, hearing about the George Floyds, hearing about all these different things, but they still ultimately think this is an anomaly somehow. This is a broken wheel somewhere that needs to be fixed, rather than the routine reality of the day to day.
I think it's also a piece of, we have, particularly in our community, in larger society in America for sure, but in our community, we have what I like to refer to as the illusion of safety.
Yeah.
And part of that is the notion of how we discuss crime.
Yeah.
Right? So crime is sensationalized in a way, we both know this. Over 80% of the crime that occurs in America it constitutes by traffic violations, nonviolent offenses, and other misdemeanors that are not necessarily serious in nature.
Yeah.
So you're talking about less than 20% of serious violent crime.
Mm-hmm.
But if you turn on the television or you pay attention to talking points from either side, from either party, right?
Yeah.
There is this boogeyman scare tactic of like, it could be you when you look at the entire crime chart, if you will, of some stuff that shouldn't even be punishable at all. But that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
You know, municipalities funding themselves on the backs of poor communities vis-a-vis extra taxation in the form of parking tickets, all types of other stuff like fines and fees and the like. When we look at crime and we talk about it in a way as if it's ever present and happening all the time, it then creates the desire, I want to feel safe.
Yeah.
And then so we get in spaces where it's like, well, we're socialized to believe more police make us safe, where it could not be further than the truth.
I don't think America is truly honest with itself about what it perceives as the danger. If America is honest with itself that it perceives black people, free brown people, these people in these populations roaming about free, that's the danger, then it makes sense what they believe police is doing for them in terms of that. But they don't believe the people who call for the police, right? Police are most present in black neighborhoods and brown neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods. That's just the truth. I see way more police in Flatbush than any white person calling for more NYPD and Manhattan is ever going to see. So they know that it's not about police presence that makes them feel safer in their communities. Right. The safety, the thing that they're trying to keep away is us.
Keep you over there.
The police are there to keep and to manage us away from them. And that's the truth about it, because this is the thing. This is what I find interesting about what indoctrination means. And people can recognize indoctrination in a cult and in anything else, but they don't see it in America. Even if it were that, okay, when you hear about these alarmist hysteria, all these crimes, even if you're sensationalizing violent crime, well, that should still make you want to do something different, right? Because you're not safe than whatever it is you're doing. Right. America spends more money on policing and mass incarceration than anybody else, right? They highlight cities like New York City. We have over 35,000 officers in NYPD. They give almost $11 billion to NYPD, another $820 million to Rikers. NYPD is set to spend almost $860 million in overtime. So if it's all this crime, if it's dangerous, the only method that America employs is policing. Tough on crime, mass incarceration. So who's that a failure of?
The other side to that, right, is as you have these conversations about spending here in New York City, please do not get it twisted. The conversation about police budgets is very, very deep and leads me to my sort of like another point. We're talking about excessive amounts of power being given to police unions to dictate how cities' budgets are managed, how police are treated, the lack of accountability with respect to the entire system as a whole. Yeah. You're talking about this at a national level, not just in New York, of course, with the exorbitant amount of money that we spend on police. But there's another issue that we got to sort of unpack here, and that is internally. We don't have, in my opinion, as a community, non-negotiables around our safety. Yeah. And when I say non-negotiables, I'm talking about VOTEPs. Mm-hmm. You could have VOTEPs, I'll have propaganda, right? Like I'll slide that as an even exchange. There is so if you want to have a conversation about civic engagement, I'm good with it. Yeah. I'm good with it. Yeah. All right, cool. And use your voice, go to the ballot, so on and so forth.
They leave it at that.
Right. I am not okay with the notion that we on any level are going to vote away systemic racism within American policing. Yeah. Not just that, we don't give ourselves any sort of leg to stand on when we will then turn around and negotiate our own safety.
Some demands on this.
And negotiate our own demands.
We turn into cheerleaders for the Democratic Party and then request nothing.
Correct. So miss me with the notion that we got to get so-and-so enough votes so they could pass this. Miss me with all of that. And I think that's just a very hard conversation to have, and one that I would really appreciate your perspective on, because when I say it, I catch heat. it's irresponsible, blah, 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 blah. But as someone else who's
Right.
in the space, I would love to hear I'm not prompting
Yeah.
you to say nothing, but
Yeah.
maybe if people hear it from somebody other than me, it'll start to resonate. Like maybe there is something to sort of the exorbitant amount of, or the extra emphasis we place on our civic engagement as though that is some sort of panacea for
Yeah.
what it is that we all know is not going to be solved at the ballot box.
I think you're absolutely correct. I think let me give, I guess, the example of that. I live in New York. I have lived in America since 2008. I am an attorney here. Obviously this is my community, this is the country I've built my life in. But I can't vote. I'm a lawyer. I'm an officer of the court. I do all these things. I'm incredibly informed. I could probably influence who other people might vote for, but I can't vote. And that might be in the case of my immigration status. But first of all, if you think about that, there are a significant amount of people similarly situated. We assimilate well, we blend in, we're all Black, but we don't have the ability to vote. And you look at a place like New York City, there's a whole lot of Caribbean Black people like myself that don't have that power, that are impacted by what happens. And in that respect, look at that with the criminal system. You're disenfranchised. It's not a mistake that most people, when they get a criminal conviction, they go to prison, they have their voting rights affected, right? If you have that being done to your community generation after generation, combine that with gerrymandering, they've done everything that they can to dilute your voting power anyways. I'm not saying don't vote, but it would be foolhardy even in the best, even if you looked at it in the light most favorable to voting is the way. The reality is they've done their best even in that. And then if you just look to just what is, I guess, common sense, Asada Shakur talks about that is no one has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the sensitivities and the emotions of their oppressor.
Absolutely.
That's just the truth.
I asked you at the beginning, and we didn't really get into this. There's so much that we could talk about. And some of it is like the fact that we do this and may not necessarily always have the space or platform to really engage it and really open it up. But I want us to at least sort of end on this part of the conversation around, I asked you initially, do we need police?
Yeah.
And you said no. I think that for people who are in community, that example, or that answer rather, is troubling. It's hard to digest. And part of the reason is there are people who are legitimately concerned about crime in community. Yeah.
Everyone's concerned about that.
And so I think for people who are in that space to make the jump to like, we can police ourselves or we can reimagine what this looks like, it's very, very difficult. What do you say to them?
So what I find interesting is what the default becomes. Whenever I appear on shows, I be on some right-wing spaces, they love to be like, statistically we polled and Black people really care about crime.
Yeah.
Everybody cares about crime. Everybody cares about feeling safe, right? What we disagree about is what that means and how to deal with it. And America has created this default so that to care about crime and safety means you have to want to fund a failed approach to dealing with it. My problem is this. The reason why people have that knee-jerk reaction is because what if they've been taught the police do and what the police are supposed to do. And even though deep in their hearts, they know that's inconsistent with the reality of what police actually do. And we know that. There's the thing is people who like to present it as though we're being hyperbolic, as though we're just a crime community or, we are exaggerating the way that we are disproportionately impacted by the police. And I want to say this. It's not a Black problem. It's a collective problem. We live in a police state. Police kill over 1,000 people each year that we know of. And we all know everything that the police give you is underreported. That's a reality that affects us. The fact that it's not hyperbole, the police are killing people every single day in this country, across this country. And that's just who they're killing that they're telling you about it. You're not hearing about the general level of brutality and violence that comes with that and what's being paid for, right?
But in order, and I'm 100% aligned with you, but I gotta channel one of my dream team members right now. Something I learned a long time ago that makes a lot of sense from my girl, Gloria Cherubin, is if you want people to do something different or stop doing something rather that they're doing, you got to give them something else.
And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to get to it.
What's that?
The same way, right? Whenever anything happens, whenever anything goes wrong in the community, people go, we'll give the police more money, right? That's the only approach. They don't have some imaginative special, top 10 layer system, right? And I'm saying that instead of giving There's no world in which you look at an empty vacant lot, you know what I mean, that's run down and garbage, and you don't go and pick up the lot, you don't fix up the lot, you don't make the lot nice, but you go and hire people to guard the lot. That's not how it works, right? Only something once it's valuable there, that's when you get guards, that's when you get people to protect it. It's very obvious that the police are not there. You're not putting more money into the policing than the community it is that they're protecting and serve. So that's not what they're doing. I'm saying in the same way you recognize that the safest communities are not the most policed, they're the most resourced. It's not a coincidence that generation after generation after generation, the same communities are deemed high crime areas. The same communities are being policed in the same way. But you're telling me that they have the same problems. But instead of putting that money, the same knee-jerk reaction, you have to give more money to the police, give it to people to support their mental health, their housing, their infrastructure, their schools, because the T is this, and I'll say as someone who's a public defender, the vast majority of people that are in the criminal system are represented by a public defender. And I need us to understand how impoverished that means. Like, we know it means, if you can't afford a lawyer, you'll be assigned, but how poor is that? I could not afford a lawyer. And I'm doing well. And I could not afford an attorney right now, but I wouldn't qualify for my services. The average person in the criminal system made annually less than $12,000. That's dirt poor. So if that's the vast majority of who is in the U.S. criminal system, who is being policed?
I talk a lot about the fact that we can't have a conversation about law enforcement or about crime in America if we're not willing to examine and to accept the reason that crime occurs.
Yes.
I have this conversation so often where I tell people, look, poor people or people who find themselves in close to dire adjacent straits, or spaces that are disadvantageous, that they did not create, they don't commit crime because they somehow like committing crime.
Right.
If they commit crime, it's because they don't like being poor.
Yes.
And so the issues around addressing that are far more likely to lead to a different outcome than it is to manage the situation the ways that we have chosen to manage them vis-a-vis law enforcement.
And the frustrating part is they know that. It's a policy, it's a policy choice, right?
It's not just a policy choice. Well, it is a policy choice, but it's not, when people understand, and we could talk about this forever, when people understand the economics of what our criminal accountability system in America produces around just incarceration, America's carceral state, and the amount of general just revenue that it generates for different municipalities.
When they started.
The number, right. So when people understand the money that goes into how we engage law enforcement, community,
that's the thing.
All of it begins to make more sense.
America had the time. That's the thing about America, though. America is a country built around information concealing, right? Mm-hmm. The reality, people don't talk about these as connected, and I find that interesting with the media wave. They constantly talk about all the protests of 2020 and to fund, and how police have been funded and all these different things, but they don't draw a connection between those protests and the sudden focusing on banning Black history, information, critical race, all these different things, because the reality is people support something because they're misinformed, they're educated, they're indoctrinated in a particular kind of way. But when people begin to unlearn things, they begin to find new information, they change, which is why you see a society is shifted, right? A shift in social consciousness. When they start seeing more representation, they see this, you get a more progressive society. So what they said is, hey,
we gotta stop this.
Yeah, we gotta put a stop to you finding that information out at once.